Welcome to Utah Stories. So today on the program, we're looking at the homeless solutions for Utah. And the thing in particular I'm interested in is why the solutions that are not working are getting the most funding, and the solutions that are working get almost no government funding or taxpayer support. That's the topic of today's program. Thanks for joining me. My name is Richard Markosian. We actually got a new name for this podcast other than Utah Stories. Utah Stories, by the way, is a magazine. And it's a fun magazine. It has a lot of success stories. It's got a lot of stories about artists and entrepreneurs and farmers. It addresses the issues, and it's a really fun, engaging experience to read the magazine. This podcast is something different. It's a lot of my own personal opinions, my own insight. It doesn't necessarily represent the brand of Utah Stories. And so I want to call this podcast The Quiet Part Out Loud. I want to call it that because I feel like there's a lot of quiet parts in Utah politics, in Utah culture that's just not said out loud. And if you've grown up in Utah, you will know what I'm talking about. There's just a lot of things you don't say. And I find that there's just a lot of local media that does not say the quiet parts out loud, that don't want to talk about the corruption that exists in our Utah state legislature, which is made up of almost all developers controlling our state politics. I think there's a lot of people who don't want to talk about the complete and utter failure of the homeless policies that exist in this state. And there's a lot of people who don't want to talk about and say out loud. For example, I got a call from a farmer today about Chinese buying up our farmland. So everything that we're not saying out loud related to the quality of life issues in Utah, that's what this podcast is about. So if you like that concept, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, or better yet, go to utahstories.com, subscribe to our free digital newsletter. Absolutely free. We'll send it to you. And if you want to support our coverage, you can subscribe to the magazine for $3 a month. That's also by visiting utahstories.com. Okay, let's dive right in. I want to start by playing a clip of Governor Spencer Cox speaking at an event I attended. It's a Solutions Utah conference that was held at the Other Side Academy. And he's talking about how the compassion pendulum needs to shift. We need to change where those goalposts are in terms of how we are adequately compassionate toward homeless individuals. Let's play that clip right now.
We're not only going to show compassion, but we're actually going to help people who are suffering suffer even more than they're suffering. That we're going to keep giving them not just permission to suffer, but we're going to aid and abet them in their suffering. That there's something good about letting people die on the sidewalk as they're shooting up, and he pushes back very hard against that and says that is a huge mistake that we have made. That pendulum has swung too far, and it's time to swing it back. There is a section in that book where he's talking to someone who had experienced homelessness, who had been addicted to fentanyl and meth, and who had struggled but had finally gotten their life together. And this person said something that I've shared before, but I'm going to share it again because it was life-changing for him. It was life-changing for me. He said, we always have this mantra that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. As a farmer, we grew up saying that. And he says, we use that all the time in this space, and we use it as a justification to allow people to do the worst harms to themselves. You can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink. And what he said, but we make a big mistake. You can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink, but you can make that horse very thirsty.
Okay, so I attended this little conference luncheon put on by Solutions Utah, formerly the Pioneer Park Coalition, and they held a series of speeches and 2 panel discussions on homelessness. And I found it really interesting because here, where they held the conference was the campus of TOSA, the Other Side Academy. And if you've watched this program, been a part of it, you might know we've had David DeRocher on the program, who's the executive director of the Other Side Academy. He really speaks about the need for personal accountability when it comes to both the homeless service providers and the homeless patients, I should say, the people getting administered the services. And there's just a complete lack of personal accountability and institutional accountability. And if you can't hold an institution accountable for all the money you're spending through that institution, as taxpayers are, and we don't have any data on whether or not those institutions are actually working, and even conversely, we have data showing that they're not working, why do we keep pouring money into those service providers? And so Cox brought that up later on in his speech. And then he talked about personal accountability. I'm going to play that clip for you now.
And so my commitment to the legislature is that you get to hold me accountable. And in turn, I'm going to hold all of you accountable, everyone in this space. We have to be accountable. And even if it's our job and it's our NGO and it's the best thing that we've ever done in our lives, if it's not working, then we're going to stop doing it. And we're going to do something that does work, because we know that there are things that work. And that's going to be really hard. It's going to be really, really hard, because some really great people are going to lose their funding.
Okay, so here in Utah, we've got two converging problems. We've got some of the greatest increases in home ownership costs in the whole entire country. We are fifth in the nation in the greatest increases in housing costs in the nation just over the past 3 years. And then we have an increasing homeless population. A lot of people from, we've learned, places like Las Vegas, Los Angeles, even all over Wyoming, are sending their homeless people to Salt Lake City to get the services we offer here. And our homeless population is just swelling. It's getting out of control. You go downtown Salt Lake City, you've never seen so many homeless people. And I was in Chicago recently, and I didn't see any homeless people in the central business district area. But in Salt Lake City, you're seeing them everywhere, because there are not enough homeless shelter beds. There's just not. We're way, way deficient in that area. And so, our compassion tells us, of course, these people need a place to stay. But and they do. I'm not disputing that at all. Of course, we need to have more beds. Of course, we need to have more services. But on the other side of the coin, what do you do if somebody is on drugs, they are occupying a park, they are setting up a tent, and they're basically just destroying a park with used needles, and they're making it unsafe to go into that park? And then we are sending in our compassionate homeless resource folks to give them water, to give them food, to essentially enable them to stay in that park and destroy the park and the landscape. That's really the situation we are in now. I want to show some slides from a presentation given by Del Keller at this same conference. He shows how the Jordan River was initially the first place the Salt Lake County went in and cleaned up. And they pulled out 14 tons of garbage there in 2005. And since then, they've done 14 trips to the Jordan River area. And every time they pull out at least 10 tons of garbage. And it's because I know I go along the Jordan River and I interview people. And so I'm really curious why people consistently camp there. And so I interview people all the time. This is a clip from a lady I interviewed just a couple of weeks ago who's been camping along the Jordan River ever since she became homeless just a year ago. Here's what she has to say.
This is somewhat better than some of the affordable housing that they have out there at the communities, that with all the people there. Don't get me wrong. I'm a previous drug user. I'm a recovering addict. But there's a lot of drug activity going on in some of these places, and I will never go back to that. That's not to say never, because you never know what's going to happen.
But if you're going to get into housing, you don't want to have that element.
Exactly. I don't want that around. And what can you do? There's not, when the options are limited.
You can see the reason why she camps is she has these dogs and puppies. She's got a husband. She wants to keep her family together. And obviously, you can't do that in our current homeless resource situation that we have right now. And so, do I blame her at all for camping? No, not at all. I would do the same thing if it was a matter of being able to keep my dogs or send my dogs to some shelter. I would choose to camp outside for sure. And so I don't blame her or her husband or any of the people along the Jordan River for camping, but we need to have some kind of sanctioned method for having these campsites. They can't just turn into open air drug scenes. And unfortunately, almost all of them do. It's because people are obviously down on their luck. They've had a series of unfortunate events happen, and then they find themselves just wanting to get a release from the pain. And that release is readily available because there's people trafficking to these campers all the time. And, unfortunately, it's destroying the riverbank along the Jordan River. There's cleanup efforts going on constantly, and it's our taxpayer dollars that are being spent to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep these camps clean. Why not have a dumpster? Why not have a couple of porta potties? Why not have a different sorts of camps set up for different types of people in different situations? We just need more camping space so that these people aren't out there, jeopardizing their lives. What I talked to this lady about off air was unreal. I asked her, do you feel safe out here? And she said, absolutely not. Women are getting raped out here all the time, and it goes unreported. There's nothing they feel like they can do about it. There's violence going on all the time. The police, they don't even bother to call the police a lot of times. It's just very unsafe, and if you're down at the bottom, you're going to be stuck at the bottom if you don't have a good way to get clean, to have safety, to have a nice bed. And so obviously that needs to change. And so the governor talked about that they are building a new homeless shelter. It's going to be, they got $6 million of funding from House Bill 297. They were really touting this new bill that they passed because it not only does it set aside money for a new homeless shelter, but it's going to hold all these homeless resource centers accountable for the conditions that they find inside of them. As we reported on in the past, the organizations that get the most funding, like the Road Home operates about 15 homeless shelters and permanent supportive housing facilities. They're all just completely overrun by drugs. And I won't say that it's exactly the Road Home's fault, because what we have is a situation where these people have been designated disabled because they are drug addicts. So they get this housing, they get this permanent supportive housing, and then they get into the apartment, and what's the first thing they do? They start using drugs because that's their disability that qualified them for the housing. So what happens if they stop using the drugs? They could potentially lose their housing because then they don't necessarily qualify for permanent supportive housing. It just doesn't make sense. It's like there's the ladder going up in our society, which is the socioeconomic ladder that most people want to climb, but now there's a ladder going down, which people climb down so that they can get all those government benefits and free housing and free healthcare and free food and free everything, as long as they're climbing that ladder downward. And of course that's going to be a terrible situation. And so it's pretty cool what's happening with this House bill, because I think it's untethering Utah from the federal policies that create this terrible situation all over our country, because this is a federal policy that you have a disability, Social Security disability. It's a federal program. You get the housing based on that. Housing first, great, put somebody up in an apartment, but then these people are just dying like crazy. And my sources inside the Magnolia apartment verified that. We did a grandma request. We found that 8 people had died in the facility since it had opened, and I'm told another 8 people have died just in the last 6 months by the manager there. So I think that there is a serious drug epidemic going on. Governor Cox also talked about it. He recommended the book called The Least of Us by Samuel Kenzeas. Is that how you say it? Quijones. And he writes about how the Mexican drug cartels have absolutely blown up fentanyl, and it's just destroying our populations. I mean, it's really destroying the most vulnerable people in our society, and we really have to stop this from happening. But the way to do that is not by letting people camp until they die of fentanyl poisoning. you don't let people, you don't think it's not compassionate to let people be enabled until eventually they just pass away. We need to stop the fentanyl trade. We need to have people in housing, and we need to start supporting the homeless organizations that actually work, like Switchpoint, the Other Side Academy, the In Between. We've had them all here on this program. And so I think that's about all I have to say. I think that obviously to see that institutional accountability is coinciding with personal accountability for the people who are receiving services. Governor Cox's main tagline that I agreed with is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. They always say that. But the horse has to be thirsty. The only way you can make homeless people thirsty and want to have recovery is if they reach a rock bottom. They reach a point where they know they're simply not going to be able to continue to live in this manner without getting help of recovery, getting off the drugs. And so I really appreciated the conference. I appreciate Solutions Utah for putting this on. It was very well done. I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it actually feels like it's starting to be done now. And I think that's very encouraging. But I'd love to have your comments on this. Do you think these are good ideas? Do you think they'll work? Do you think we are being overly compassionate, or is there not enough compassion? What do you think? I'd like to hear. With this new podcast, it's really cool. We have the Utah Housing Executive for the state of Utah, Steve Waldrip is his name. He's coming on the program tomorrow. I would love to have some questions to ask him about affordable housing, because homelessness and affordable housing obviously go hand in hand. If there's no affordable housing and people are being priced out of the housing market, then they essentially fall into a chasm where they can't afford to live anymore, and of course they're going to show up on the streets. So we have to solve this problem using common sense approach as well. So what would you like to see in affordable housing in Utah? I got a whole bunch of questions I'm going to ask him tomorrow for the program. So stay tuned for that, and we'd like to have you be a bigger part of the program. So go to utahstories.com, subscribe to our free digital newsletter, like, subscribe, share this program with your friends if you like this content, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.